Welcome to our first panel here at Hall of Fame. I hope you all are getting really excited for this week's events. We have a really exciting panel for you all today. This is called The Path is Not Always a Straight Line, Nonlinear Career Journeys. So I have four wonderful people joining me up here today. Don Wershba, Jeff Villanueva, Ashish Manchanda, and Chance Glasco. So let's give them a round of applause. So what I'd love to have you guys do first is just introduce yourselves, tell them a little bit about yourselves and what y'all do for a living.
Well, now I'm retired.
What did you used to do?
Okay, well, the last thing that I did was work for a console company, which some of you may know about solid state logic. And I was with them for 29 years, between 91 and 2020. And I started off what I thought was going to be as a trainer, because I was a recording engineer before that. And am I close enough to this? Are you okay with that? Sorry, the audio engineer is like, there's a ring at about 400 there. And I kind of stumbled into working for solid state logic, and we can talk about that in the nonlinear path. Yeah. But for 29 years, I worked with recording studios, some film houses, some post-production, some broadcasting, showing them the equipment almost from the standpoint of a former operator. Mm-hmm. And then I got too old and I retired. I
know that feeling. Jeff, do you want to give us a...
Sure. My name is Jeff Villanueva. I'm a 98 recording arts graduate. I started out in the industry as an engineer, well, intern really. Worked my way up from intern to start engineering here in Orlando during the whole boy band scene. After that, I met a producer by the name of Rodney Darkchild Jerkins. I spent about 4.5 years working with him, pretty much all over the pop industry side of making records. We had a great career together. It was time for me to move on, so I started engineering for the We the Best management and We the Best Records, DJ Khaled's label. I worked with Khaled for about 7.5 years, produced tons of hits with him. And then about 2014, I kind of looked to my kids and I started seeing them grow up. And I was missing out on a lot of those opportunities. So it was time for me to kind of pivot a little bit and try to make the money work for me a little bit and maybe not work as hard. I came back here. I started working in career development for about 3.5 years. But still very much had the passion to do what I love to do. I started looking around town to see what opportunities were there for me. I eventually got a job over at EA Sports here in town. I started doing a lot of audio producing for the Madden titles and NBA Live at the time. And in that short amount of time that I was there, unfortunately, and I really loved working there a lot, this current opportunity where I'm at now, Ti-Fi Studios, came up. And it was basically a mixture of everything I've done over the last 20 years, from recording music to voiceovers, but on a different platform, and that's with theme parks. So right now, my job at Ti-Fi Studios, I'm a sound designer, recording engineer, and we basically reproduce music for theme parks worldwide, cruise lines, and so forth.
Awesome. Jeff is also one of our inductees this year. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Ashish?
Yeah, graduated 1987, February, in a double bubble class, as it was called. And we were two classes that was combined. Started out as an engineer, went on to become a producer, but I had the entrepreneurial streak, and in time, my wife and I set up a diversified creative arts company called Boone Castle Media and Entertainment. So we have video, music production, live entertainment, marketing, and tech that we do today. And so we run our own record labels. Now we manage other artists, songwriters, and producers. And we are getting ready to launch our flagship show here called The Global Icon.
Awesome. And Chance?
Yeah, I graduated in 2001. It was supposed to be 2000, but I failed my rigging class. Failing a class is one of the best things you can do here, because it's like, oh, I get like double the knowledge than I paid for it. You get to do it twice. And then left, got an internship working on a game called Medal of Honor Allied Assault for PC. And then 22 of us that didn't like the person we worked for left that company, formed a new company called Infinity Ward, connected with Activision, had to create a franchise to compete with Medal of Honor. So we made the very first Call of Duty, which was on PC only, and then Call of Duty 2, Modern Warfare 1, 2, and 3, and Ghosts. After Ghosts, I left. I moved to Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 3.5 years in Rio, mostly Rio, and started consulting just to make money on the side. Had a VR startup for a while that was like post-VR craze, pre-metaverse craze, so really bad timing because it was basically both of those. Now I consult and have my own game studio called Good Dog Studios. We're making Martial Arts Tycoon Brazil, which is a tycoon game about building and managing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms in the favela. So imagine like Roller Coaster Tycoon, The Sims combined if it was about martial arts.
That sounds awesome. Can't wait to see that. So I'd love to hear about your journeys and where it was that you intended to start and how that's taken you through your careers. Someone wants to start.
Well, since I didn't really talk about
Yeah.
anything before 1991, as you can tell, I was around and I was employable before 1991. So this is not to contradict the title of this, but there are certain aspects that can be linear. If you know what you want to do in some roundabout form, that can be sort of a path that you're trying to follow. It's the details that become either erratic or nonlinear. So I had tape recorders in my house. My father was a news journalist, and he would bring a microphone home or a tape recorder home. I just became fascinated with it. And I knew probably from the time that I was about 12 or 13, I wanted to do something with sound. I was fascinated by the concept of you could record somebody, make a not a record, but you could make a document out of it, and that would last. So whether it was somebody talking or learning how to play guitar or whatever, and like you could put it down on a piece of tape, and then it would always be there, and you could play it back. And just that little kernel of that was fascinating to me, and I kind of knew I wanted to be a recording engineer from the time that I was probably 15 or 16 years old. I didn't actually know what a recording engineer did in detail, but I got to meet some, and every time I did, it kind of reinforced that was a path that I wanted to take. And it did take that path for a while, until 1991, where what I was doing in the recording studio wasn't touching my heart. I was doing a lot of advertising, jingles and stuff like that, and it just didn't touch me. And then I tried a very ill-fated year of audio post-production when it was in its infancy. And that not only didn't touch my heart, it almost gave me a nervous breakdown because I was totally focused on the sound aspect of it. And the reason I took the job there actually because they had an SSL console, of which there were kind of very few, 1983, 84. And I just wanted to learn this piece of equipment because I was fascinated by it, which eventually down the road led to the fact that I knew the people at the company. And that was a big left turn to go from being a recording engineer to being, a sales rep, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And that led me into solid state logic, which was a whole new education on everything. I knew nothing about the selling, sort of the commercial aspects of it. I also didn't know what a patch bay was or how it worked. And I knew what a patch bay was. I didn't know how it actually worked. You plug this to here and it goes from here to here. I didn't understand there was a whole pile of wires that actually went somewhere. And so you learn that. You learn about negotiation, client relationships and things like that, and just becoming a more rounded human being. But it was still with sound. It was still with audio. Yeah. And so that path was pretty straightforward. But the right and left turns that I took to go through that, and everything that you do is, as my friend used to say when I would get nervous about a recording session, he goes, everything is practice for the big one. Well, when's the big one? He goes, well, I can't tell you that. Yeah. But you'll know, but it's all practice. It's all like learning how to learn and learning new skills.
Well, and that actually leads to, before I get to the other three, to a question that I have for you, because you mentioned that there were some new skills that you needed to learn. Was that something that you were able to learn easily in the job, in your career? Did you have to go back and get additional training? I've
only really had 3 jobs in my long life working for someone. I was a freelancer for a while, sort of in between that stuff. But I had a fantastic, I would call him my mentor, but he was my boss, a gentleman named Piers Plaskett, who used to work for the Beatles. He worked at Trident Studios, and he worked at Apple Studios when they actually had that. And he is, and he lives in Fort Myers. He's nearby if you need to consult with a great boss. He just, he was a great teacher, and he never really criticized. He would guide, but he never criticized. And so I said to him when he hired me, because I thought I was going to train people how to use the console, and he said, well, actually, we're on April 1st, this was, so we didn't know if it was, April Fool's. Yeah. He said, actually, we're looking for another salesperson. And I said, what? And he said, you know how to use the equipment? I said, yeah. He goes, all right, we'll teach you the rest, which was the art of negotiation, specifying consoles, dealing with project engineering back in England, getting it right, making sure if it's a remote patch bay that it's a foot longer, not 6 inches too short to get to the patch bay. All really, really important things. And if you made a mistake, it was a learning experience. And fortunately, I didn't make any that were career-threatening.
Well, and I think that, because that reminds me of, I know with my own experience, that I think what people sometimes are nervous about is taking that job that's outside of their career path because they think, oh, I don't know how to do that. So can any of you guys speak to that as well?
For me, I think that actually happened within the last 3 years, and very much like Don's experience, mine was always linear. I got into music at an early age, playing trumpet and so forth, but where I took that curved road, that turn in the road for me was realizing my worth and having my skills work for me and to benefit me and not at a client's, time and place. I very much love working with clients and so forth, but I also, as I'm getting older and more specialized in my career, I also value my time. So for me, it was, taking this opportunity with Ti-Fi Studios and realizing, there's some days that it's not as glamorous, like I'm doing, just a daily voiceover, but there's other days and opportunities where I get to record a full orchestra on Abbey Road. So it's for me, that schedule and that being able to have everything that I want and do and I'm good at, but on my time, like a 9 to 5 was the perfect road for me. And it was very much scary because I had to tell my clients, like, hey, listen, I think I'm going to make this leap into, doing music production for theme parks and leaving cushy jobs and leaving, long-lasting relationships that I had built over 20 years.
Yeah. Did either of you have anything to add to that? Just about your own experiences?
So I think I started out from a lot of uncertainty. I think I was a dancer before I got into music. I'd like to think I'd least romanticize about that. But I remember when Billie Jean came out on television. Yeah, I was so taken in by all of that.
Yeah.
But of course, I was a late starter. I think I started very late in the music business.
Yeah.
And I got into engineering by desperation because we wanted to record ourselves when we started playing music after high school. And there was really nobody around in the city to record us well. So we started figuring it out, that how do you record? But it was very exciting.
Yeah.
And cutting a long story short, so I got into engineering. I love physics, but I love the creative arts too. And I always thought of how can we have integrated studies, and I was always fascinated by that why should one stick to one discipline?
Yeah.
Why can't you learn another discipline along with it?
Yeah.
Kind of like how liberal arts programs are set up. But in India at that time, we didn't have those kind of options.
Yeah.
So by the time I was doing my engineering in electronics, I got heavily into performing. I was performing a lot. I was a drummer and a songwriter and became engineer along the way because there was no one to record us, so we had to figure it out. And I really enjoyed the process. So somewhere I knew that I was going to become an entrepreneur because I loved movies as much as I loved music, but there was no focus on how do you go about getting an education in something like this. And that was a concern for the family and for myself too. Though I was, I would brave it out and show that, that I know what I'm doing, but I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to do, but where to do and how to do was a challenge.
Figuring out what that.
And this was just pre the internet time, early 90s. And so through magazines, my mom would order Mix magazine and whichever other magazine we could get hold of to understand. And again, jumping timelines, learned about Full Sail and a lot of other institutes that time to how do you basically, there is a place to learn all of this and fast.
Yeah.
So landed up at Full Sail, had a lovely innings here. There was something that I'd heard in our family. They said in your younger years, if you slog it out, you won't have to slog it out in your later years. So that's somewhere it used to stick in my mind. So I remember when I came to Full Sail, I was hyper-focused. I think I was obsessed.
Yeah.
And I really, really worked very hard, and I was a big troublemaker here. And there are a lot of stories around that. But before I left, before I graduated, I had 3 jobs in my hand, all paid for, and all were going to do my immigration also. And one of them was Skywalker. So I was at Skywalker, and I'd met the lovely gentleman, Bruce Swedin, who, of course, became my mentor. And he called me up one day, and I'd met him at Full Sail. And he said, "What are you doing?" So I said, "I'm joining Lucasfilms now. I've got this great offer." But he knew that I came to the US to learn how to make hit records first.
Yeah.
So he said, "Come to New York." So I said, "But there's no job, no internship." And he said, "Yes, there is no job for you, there is no internship for you, there's no payment for you. Come to New York."
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to get my visa here, I'm going to get payments over here and everything. But I kind of stayed true to my gut. Why did I come to this country? Was to learn how to make the biggest records possible. And who was the guys behind some of the biggest records possible? Was this man. So next flight out, I was in New York, no job, no internship. Figured out a place to stay. I had some friend, family. And so my journey has been a lot of squiggles, then there's a lot of straight lines, there's a lot of squiggles. And now we are entrepreneurs, and we have this media arts company, where it encompasses all of that, and plus an education wing in India. Yeah. To help people get onto the path faster, to create those kind of opportunities. And but it's been an exciting roller coaster, totally. And there's a great SSL user, Robert Muttlang, those of you who know about him. He's like the superstar of producers. The joke in the industry is that if you want your grandmom to have a hit record, go to Mutt, and he'll give her a hit record. And he was a big SSL guy. Yeah. So everything of Shania Twain, Def Leppard, The Cars, Foreigner, Bryan Adams, a good part, Muttlang. Yeah. So he has a line called, living in the microscopy and macroscopy. So I kind of live with that mantra, to have that kind of perspective, and he's a prince at that. Yeah. So my life has been truly a roller coaster and an adventure. And of course, we'll speak more about it.
Well, and I'm curious to know, how do you know when to take that job that's not in that direct line? How do you know that this is going to be a good opportunity to go to New York? You don't.
You don't, yeah. You don't. I was just going to add that my significant other, who became my wife and still is my wife, she was terrified. She knew what I did for a living, as a recording engineer. And I said, "I think I can take this job with Solid State Logic." And she goes, "Well, doing what?" I says, "It's a sales position." He goes, "You, sales? Oh." But the cool part was, because I didn't screw it up, and I did okay, we were able to get married and have kids, without the pressure of am I going to make a living? It's really tough, and it's tougher now than it's ever been to be a recording engineer. It was a lot more structured, and it had a form to it. Now with the democratization of recording, it's a whole nother animal. And it was a really good move. And sometimes you just have to close your eyes and jump into the deep end of the pool. And hopefully you'll have a good boss or someone who can help you, guide you through the stuff that you don't know, because you're talking about getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Being a recording engineer was my comfort zone.
Right.
Selling consoles, I didn't have a clue,
Yeah.
but I learned.
I know when I was a student, there was always the thought process that you should be really good at one thing, right? And now there seems to be this acceptance that, no, you can be good at a lot of things. What are your opinions on that? Chance, do you want to go first?
I was going to talk more about the last question.
Yeah,
more
please
about that. So for me, after graduating, I mean, my whole path to and from Full Sail wasn't that straight. I mean, I was only in Florida because I was kidnapped as a kid, right? And I was missing until I was 9. I mean, I knew where I was. Mm-hmm. Other people didn't, so I guess I was missing. And so I was living in Brevard County, right? And the fact that I was 45 minutes away from Full Sail is more or less how I found out about it, because there was someone at school that told me about it. So I'd grown up playing video games, you know, really inspired by movies like Jurassic Park, right? And so that inspired me to get into to get into animation. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do games or if I wanted to do movies. And so after graduating, I decided I was going to go out to Los Angeles because there was more movie and game jobs there than pretty much anywhere. And I went out there, and you know, I had pretty much no money. So I was like living on couches, homeless, sleeping in the back of my car at Gold's Gym for like a week. Just a lot of just like trying to find some kind of work out there. And I didn't find anything in Los Angeles. I was out there for a little over a month, failed, started driving back to Orlando, stopped in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where I was born. That's where I was until I was, you know, like 5 or 6, and to see family. And there was a company that was working on a Spielberg project, Medal of Honor, the first PC version. And so I just mailed them or emailed them and said, hey, you know, I just graduated. Here's a couple animations. I'll do anything. Like, pretty much said, I'll work any kind of job you have. I just want to get my foot in the door. And so that's how I got into that. Then 3-4 weeks later, you know, E3 was coming up, so they needed me to stick around, so they hired me. I think I was making $22,000 or $24,000 a year salary. It was 2001. And so that's how I ended up in Oklahoma, because there's only one game studio in all of Oklahoma, and it was this one. So the fact that I just happened to stop by there to see family and get an internship, which is totally an unplanned occurrence. But sometimes you just kind of have to go where follow the doors that are opening like right in front of you and see where they go, you know? Because at first I was thinking more that I want to be more involved in like special effects for film and TV, but ended up in games, and ended up being the right decision. So,
did any of you find that there was something totally new that you didn't realize that you loved doing by taking one of those nonlinear jobs?
I definitely found out what I didn't want to do.
That is just as relevant.
I took a nonlinear job touring, being a playback engineer, running Pro Tools for the Bad Boy reunion tour. And the way that was positioned to me by Pop's engineer, he was like, listen, you've never toured. This is perfect. We want a Pro Tools guy. We want a studio guy who's quick, who's efficient. But sure enough, you know, day one, I show up to rehearsals, you know, 2 weeks before we're about to launch his major tour. And I'm looking around me, and everybody's different than me. Everybody's, you know, it's not used to the Studio Cat vibe. And I remember calling up my wife, probably 3 hours into rehearsal, and like, I can't do this. This is too much pressure for me. Realizing that, you know, I'm listening on comms, and when the MD tells me to press play, I'm not only just pressing play to start the show, but I'm also sending time code to, you know, trigger fireworks and lighting and stuff like that. And then, God forbid, if there's we can't find the artist, you know, hey, we need to loop out this section another 16 bars, and don't mess it up because you're live. Was so much pressure. So I quickly realized, I mean, I stuck to it. Don't get me wrong. It was an opportunity of a lifetime I couldn't afford, but I quickly realized where my place in the world was, and it wasn't in the live touring arena aspect. So There are some, I always try to look at the good from the bad, right? So there are things that you definitely need to try and just feel out if it's for you or not.
Yeah.
I had kind of exactly the opposite, very specifically. When SSL had only done studio consoles, really, before they got into sort of, the home recording and stuff, but they got into live consoles, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years before I retired. And I found, again, I wasn't on a crew, thank heavens, good for them, but dealing with live sound companies, and the big ones, the Clare Brothers and the Eighth Days and what have you, the failure is not an option component of it reminded me of what the early days of recording studios are like, where it really mattered. When you're on tape and the guitar player says, can I have another crack at the solo, and you got one, you don't have a track left, and you say, yeah, you can do it again, make sure it's better than the one I'll be erasing. It's mission critical. And with live sound, I found that these people were so attuned to detail, because it could be life-threatening. I remember somebody said, in a recording studio, if the tape machine breaks or the speakers go out or whatever, you take a coffee break. At a live venue, if the PA system fails, you could have a riot on your hands. And so I was like, oh, I get it. And I loved that aspect of it. And I had no idea. I have a really good friend here, JD, who's done a lot of touring, and he knows, the same thing. It's really, really important, and I loved that. I thought that was great. I had no idea I'd ever have any involvement in live sound, and that was, sort of the opposite. I didn't want to be on a live touring crew, because that's really, really hard work. It's a great job if you're of a certain age, you have a certain amount of stamina, and there's a lot of jobs in that market too. So, just.
How many riots have you started?
They never let me behind the board at a concert.
Yeah. So, coming from India, the time that I was, there's a phrase in India called jugaad, which basically is you got to figure it out somehow and make it work. You don't get into formalities and waiting for the perfect any scenario. So, like I said, like how I got into recording was by desperation, because there was no one around or to get us some good sound or things like that. And we would record our kit, and it used to sound like a tin bag. And then you would listen to these big records, and they used to sound like cannons coming out from, these little speakers. And that was what was mesmerizing us. But during those years, we also had to figure out live sound, because a lot of the times, the guys who used to bring the live sound for our gigs, they were really bad. Like really bad. We had to tell them, like, move aside. And then we will set the sound and we will play, but don't touch it.
Yeah.
So we had to learn a little bit of live sound. We had to learn how do you do this monitoring business thing. And so basically we had to figure out everything. And it wasn't enjoyable. It was, like I said, because it had to be done.
Yeah.
So then again, jumping timelines, coming over here, once I came to Full Sail, everything was, in America, was hyper-specialized. You can either do this, either you're in live, or you're in studio, or you're in cinema. And I've somehow felt very restricted again. Because now I was coming from an environment where it's like the wild northwest, everything. And you have to figure everything out. And now you have to decide, you have to do one. So I prioritize that. I came here to make hit records, so I'm going to learn how to make hit records first. But at the same time, when I went to New York and I was with Bruce, like I said, no job, no internship, no money. So I had to pick up a gig. And at Full Sail, I remember in one of the classes, they said that when you go to a big city, you call the C-grade studios first. Then you get better. You learn how to talk to them, get past the receptionist. Then you go to the B-grade studios, and then you do it over and over again till you come to the A-grade studios. So you're better prepared. So I was like, this is smart. So let's not call up the hit factory first. Let's go to them last. So during that process, I stumbled upon a company called FNL Music. And FNL Music used to do sound for television. They had a remote recording truck. They also had a lovely studio in downtown in New York. And I was like, this is good. So I get to do a little bit of all of this, which I was missing. And records, I was already starting to do working with Bruce. So I said, okay, that's taken care of. But this will fulfill some monies and a new adventure. And I'm a big Star Trek guy. To boldly go where no one has gone before. I don't know, that somehow my mom and I used to watch the series since I was a kid. So somewhere I think it's impacted my life. We run our company like that. We are explorers. And I don't mind the exploration. It's not, I don't mind the risk at times. And I think that's why I'm suited to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. But I learned along the way that you learn skill sets. So like I learned design thinking, entertainment law, like how do you run companies? Because if eventually if you're going to fly an aeroplane, you'll better learn to fly it well.
Yeah.
You know, even whenever you learn it. So that's how my journey has been. So coming from that experience, we did a lot of, during those years, you know, MTV Unplugged, VH1 Storytellers. So things that I would never be a part of if I had just made my career choice myself. You know, but now here was an opportunity to explore something which wasn't too far away from, and that led me to have a relationship with Viacom. Then they were setting up Unplugged in India. And there's another lovely entity called Coke Studio, which is now coming back here. We came in to pretty much run the show, all the audio directors, and it was great. In New York, we were a crew of 3. Yeah. In India, we had a crew of 30.
Wow.
And most of them were kids. We brought in. Yeah. You want to come in, and you know, like internships, because that's how we wanted to kind of spread the word and share this information, because there was a dearth of engineers, producers, and. So I think for me, keeping my mind open to a certain extent led me for those adventures, which today when we run the company, so to answer that question where you need to be super focused and specialized, I think it is important to have a core skill set. But depending on your personality and what you want to do in life, I think it's not bad to, at times, like I said, depending on what you want to do, to explore something. And you don't have to be a master of everything. But for me to be aware of the entire process now helps me to do what I do at the company level better.
Yes. I say that to my students all the time. If you know the whole process, you're going to do what your section is a lot better. Yeah. Do you have any advice for the students about not getting stuck or pigeonholed kind of outside of what their end goal was? You know what I mean?
It's easy, especially in like big, at least in games, you know, you have especially AAA. You've got specialists in everything, you know. If you're working in AAA, you're not going to be modeling and animating and rigging, right? You're going to be doing probably one specific thing for the most part. There's some exceptions. And so for me, I got a little pigeonholed into, I was the first person weapons animator for most of the, you know, Modern Warfare series, and there was typically 1, maybe 2 others. But it's something that I started doing towards the end of Medal of Honor, and I just started getting good at it. So they're like, okay, you do this because you're good at it, right? And as a result, I was rarely doing any full body animation, right? So if you were to, you say, hey, Chance, animate this guy running around and then climbing a wall and, you know, just doing full body stuff, I would have probably struggled compared to, say, other people that did that full time, because I was so stuck in doing first person animations. So as a result, I was like, well, after 12, 13 years of Call of Duty, I was more or less just burned out from Call of Duty in general. You know, when you start agreeing with the YouTube comments, you know, it's time to like move on, right? like this guy has a point. That did suck, you know? Yeah, so at that point I was just like, you know, I definitely want to keep working in games, or at least like real time, but I think my personality isn't necessarily made to be behind a computer, you know, 10 hours a day, and that's it. I was doing PR and media for the games at the end of, like when it hit beta, when we can't add any more animation, they'd send me out to random countries in Europe, Brazil, stuff like that, to just do interviews with the different media. So I picked that skill up, PR and media marketing type stuff, and that really applies to what I'm doing now, because now I have my own studio. So just look for opportunities to do other things. And it's hard, especially if you're working for many hours doing the same thing. You're kind of exhausted. You don't necessarily want to go home and learn another skill or something because you're just tired. But yeah, it's good to have something else that you're doing just to keep things mixed up a little bit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
I kind of have a short answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
4 words. This is not getting pigeonholed. Make friends, be curious.
Yeah.
Make friends, ask questions, be curious. You'll learn a lot, and then you'll find something like, wow, that's really fascinating. Mm-hmm. And then you'll follow that. You're talented people. You'll learn new stuff. You'll show somebody, and you won't be pitching, oh, you can do that as well. I mean, the A2 at the Stephen Colbert show is a superb guitar player. And he would sometimes, back in the Letterman days, if one of the guitar players had, got sick or couldn't be there, he would sub. He was the A2.
That's cool.
So they, that's one way. Be real good at a bunch of things, but it's easier said than done. Make friends, be curious.
Yeah. For those of you that don't work in tech careers or majors, an A2 is an audio assistant. So they're kind of similar to a camera assistant, but in the audio department. Well, cool. I'd love to, I think, get some questions from our students. So does anybody have any questions for our panel? Yeah, right there. She's coming with the microphone. Look at you.
Yeah. Ooh. How do you deal with, maybe you have the job that you want and you're well along in your career, but your job or your industry changes through changes of genre or change in technology? How do you roll with those punches?
You just kind of have to understand that's going to happen in anything you do, just especially the way technology is advancing. I mean, when I was a kid, when I was born, we had text adventures in Pong, in 1980, right? Now we have AI you can have conversations with. We have blockchain. We have real-time graphics that look like you're in a real place, So there's really no secret. I'd say it's just make sure you're staying up to date as things, because things are not going to be the same. Even after you graduate and go join a company, you don't know if they're going to be using the same tech. So you just always have to be ready to learn what's new so you don't get left behind. Because then by the time you're in your, you say you start your career early 20s, by the time you're in mid 30s, you don't want the people that are coming out of Full Sail be schooling you. Because that's going to happen and they should, because you want to learn from those people. And I'm saying you don't want to fall behind too much, because you guys will be ahead of some of the guys that have been or people that have been working for a decade or so.
Absolutely.
And more drastically, sometimes this happened to me when I left engineering. Was right around the time that we were changing from multi-track tape machines to workstations. And I couldn't wrap my head around workstations, and I didn't think I was going to be able to work it. I made a career change. Fortunately, there was this job offering that was there. But in a drastic situation, you might actually have to not just learn what's new in your industry, you might have to actually move to another one. And that's really scary. But we talked about, closing your eyes and jumping in.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's you have to keep up or you'll be left out, in any industry. So when I left Full Sail, I was not very adept with the same workstations and with computers. Okay, so digital workstations were just coming about. Pro Tools was kind of getting settled in, and I had a fear of computers, big time fear. I did not even know how to turn this thing on. Okay, so, and then I would brood over it, and of course I was good at what I was doing otherwise, but then this whole new thing was coming up, and I was at some point it became that either I embrace this thing or I'm going to be out soon. So I've seen, it's you got to look at the devil and your fears, and face it right up front. There is no other way to get around it. And that's how I did. And I've gone through that a couple of times in my life for different things and for different aspects of work. But I think the first one when I left Full Sail was just that. And because that new technology was already just around the corner, but it wasn't totally embraced yet. So I immersed myself so much into computers. So much, I cannot tell you. I went to, how I would break down records, I would start breaking down computers. Again, I hated the process. But I had to do it because, and then I got good at it. Then I had a little team around me who was really good. I got even better at it. I became a master at it. And we went so crazy that we set up one of the first workstations, and we worked with Nuendo, with Steinberg. We did everything in the box. Before working in the box, the words were coming out. And to the point where it became a thing and that we were portable. and we would bring out the results. And we understood the old school way of working, but we also understood and embraced the new technology. We became it became so prominent, and our word got out that what we were doing with computers and music, that computer vendors would give us 50% or even give us computers for free, and they would tell us which motherboard do you buy, which RAM do you get in, which drive do you have, because we were the R&D lab for making the plane fly while you're still learning how to fly. So that worked well for me over and over again in my life, but one has to be brave enough, and you must have the courage, because really, if you don't keep up, you'll be left out.
Yeah, for sure. And we had a question over here.
Hi. So I know two of you have mentioned this, but do you recommend just straight up going to areas where I'm trying to get into game narrative writing, and the two major areas that I've seen so far are Seattle and LA for major game companies, but do you recommend just straight up getting an old friend and saying, hey, let's do something crazy and go move out to this area for a few months and hang around for industry events in the area?
It's not a bad idea. I would recommend it more years ago. Now it's kind of, with most video game companies now are hybrid remote. They have an office, but also remote workers. Some places are completely remote. We don't have an office. So it can help, but it's such a big move that it's not I can fully recommend it all the time. If you're going there and you're willing to find other ways to make money, so it's not you're just, not making money that whole time, because especially with game narrative writing, that's going to be very tough. As far as, there's a lot of studios most studios don't even have a game writer, right? And so I would say, don't only rely on writing. I would say make sure you're working in working in Unreal or Unity or something. Be picking up some other game-related skills, because even on Call of Duty, now it's changed. Because there's over 1,000 people. But when Infinity Ward was, we didn't have a game narrative writer until our studio grew to be in hundreds of people, over 200 people. For years up until Modern Warfare, I think it wasn't Modern Warfare 3, it was probably maybe where we had a writer. We had this guy, Justin Thoreau, I think, I don't know, some famous writer, I forgot his name, but he helped out a little bit, but most of our stories was just designers that were kind of had a knack for writing, right? They were designers that would be building the levels, but they'd also be writing kind of the storyline. A lot of it's, I don't know if you've played Modern Warfare 2 and remember the no Russian level, where, it's probably the most controversial video game level in existence. That was my roommate, right? And that wasn't something, and then the story was, there's a Russian ultra-nationalist group that's pretending to be Americans to go into the Moscow airport to create a false flag, right? That was just something that was in the story in the background, on a loading screen. And then he was like, hey, what if we just put the player there? Because otherwise they're not going to feel anything. It's you're crazy, but that could be a good idea. Anyways, I'm going on a little tangent. My point is, focus, don't, learn other things outside of writing, because it's going to be very hard for you to get a job out of school just as a writer only. You're going to have to find something else and then show your ability to write. And then hopefully you can slide into that being your dedicated job.
Awesome. I think do we have time for another question? Okay, let me actually get on maybe to this side of the room. We'll go over here. Yeah.
Hi, I actually have a question for Chance.
Oh.
I got the opportunity to watch you speak at CG Extreme years ago in Brazil.
Are you from Rio?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Cool. You sound American.
Yeah, do I?
Yeah, you lost your accent.
That's good, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's surprising to me to hear you talk about how you got burned out on working on, first-person animation at Infinity Ward and whatnot, because I remember the impression at the time when people heard you talk was, oh man, Chance really has it made. I would kill to be in his position. And so it's really interesting to see the difference between the external perspective on someone's career and what you're actually feelings. So I guess what I wanted to ask you is, like, how far along were you in that mindset of, oh man, I'm getting burned out of this by then, like by that time?
What year? That was 2012, right?
Yeah, that's about
So that would have been like Modern Warfare 2-ish, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah, I was pretty much after Modern Warfare 2. That's when I got burned out. So that was like the beginning of. I mean, I moved to your city, man. I was in Gloria. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Benjamin Constance. Do you know that area? Where are you from in Rio?
Say that again.
Who Benjamin Constance?
Benjamin Constant.
Yeah. And what neighborhood are you from?
I'm from Baja.
Oh, okay.
You know Baja
cool.
de Tijuca?
Yeah, I trained Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, I trained there.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Really?
I trained there a little bit, yeah.
Awesome. You should come train with us.
I'm not good at all, though.
I'm not good either, man. I'm a computer nerd. I get my ass kicked every like 3 times a week still.
Isn't the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about fight?
Right. Right.
He's wearing a gi. Like he's wearing a gi, like a kimono right now, like a business kimono. So there's a lot of good collar chokes in there, you know.
Igor, I learn new things about you every day, I swear.
See?
That's awesome.
Do we have time for one more, or where are we at?
Yeah, ask someone other than me. I'm talking a lot.
Let's go. Maybe one more? Yeah, we'll do one more.
Jay Early, Nature Coast Technical High School. First off, thank you guys for being here for the panel. So each of you have talked about a major risk or a step that you've taken away from what you thought you were originally going to do. What I wanted to ask is, did you guys have like a contingency plan? Was there a way to like mitigate the risk or like a backup, or do you just go all in for it?
Great question.
You mean like moving back with mom and dad?
Yes.
I didn't have a contingency plan. I just knew that my recording engineering career I looked at it like a baseball player. I think I was 37 when I stopped being a recording engineer and started being a salesperson for SSL. And if that hadn't have worked out, I'm not quite sure what I would have done. Because the recording industry had changed. I didn't feel it anymore, but I still wanted to be involved in it. Maybe I would have started looking at some other companies. You make contacts and stuff, but you should have, as best as you can, because there's no such thing as a sure thing.
Yeah.
I think for everyone in this room, you're going to feel that probably within the first 3 to 5 years of your career. And you have to fight that feeling, because that's going to be the breaking point. That's going to lead into an opportunity for you to actually make it in the industry. And that's speaking from firsthand experience. My dad had set me down at one point and was like, I think this is kind of an impossible pursuit now. You've been at this for 3 years and you're doing it, and it's just internship after internship. And, within that conversation, I truly realized my passion, and I was like, I really don't see myself doing anything else. And within months of that conversation is when I landed my first big gig. So that's going to be the biggest difficulty for everyone. And the only other thing I could suggest is that you have to surround yourself with like-minded people to keep you in that positive balance, and rely on them when you're feeling like that. Like, damn, I gotta get a real job. Just fight that resistance. It's gonna be hard.
Yeah, awesome. I think we're at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and give these guys a round of applause. Thank you so much. So they will be out in the hall, mingling around. Feel free to mingle with them afterwards if you didn't get to ask a question. But thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.